So if we have a look at the measurement of kidney, the kidney has got the following measurement. It's around 10 to 12 centimeter in length, 5 to 7 centimeter in width, 2 to 3 centimeter in thickness, and an average weight of 120 to 170 grams. So if we try to recollect once again, what's the length of kidney? It is 10 to 12 centimeter. Width is around 5 to 7 centimeter. Thickness is around 2 to 3 centimeters, and it weighs around 120 to 170 grams. So that's about the measurement of kidney. Now let's begin by understanding the different parts of the kidney. So the first part that we need to understand is the hilum. So if we have a look at the kidney, you can observe this region, right? This concave part of the kidney, and this concave part of the kidney where you can observe the different blood vessels as well as the nerves and the ureter. So the structure that you are seeing here is the ureter. They all are entering into the kidney. So this region, okay, you can say it is actually the entry point for the blood vessels, the ureter, to enter into the kidney. So this structure that you're observing is what we refer as hilum. So what is hilum? Towards the center of the inner concave surface of the kidney is a notch called hilum. Through the hilum, ureter, blood vessels and nerves enter. Let's have a look at the next part of the kidney, and that is the renal pelvis. If you have a look at this ureter, you can see that the part of the ureter which is within the kidney is funnel shaped. Okay, it is funnel shaped. So this structure that is appearing like a funnel is what we refer as the renal pelvis. And where is this ureter present? It is present in the hilum region, right? So it is present inner to the hilum. So inner to the hilum is a broad funnel shaped space, called the renal pelvis. So this structure that you see here is the renal pelvis. So we have learned two parts. One is hilum, another is renal pelvis. Now let's have a look at the next part, that is the renal calyces. If you have a look at the renal pelvis, you'll see that the renal pelvis is making branches, okay, into the inner parts of the kidney. So these branches that you're observing here are what we call it as calyx. Singular calyx, plural calyces. So the individual one we call it as calyx, renal calyx, and the plural we call it as calyces. As you can see, there are many calyx. So the renal pelvis has projections called calyces. So these projections of the renal pelvis we call it as renal calyces. So we observed three main parts in the kidney. One was the hilum, another was the renal pelvis, and then we saw the renal calyces. Now let's take a section of the kidney and let's see what we can observe inside the kidney, or what we can study, what anatomical parts we can observe in the kidney. So when we take a section of the kidney, we find two parts. So you know that in biology, whenever we take a section of any organ or a tissue, we usually come across two parts. One is the cortex, another is medulla. The cortex is usually the outer layer and medulla is the inner layer. So similarly here also we can find that the kidney consists of an outer cortex and an inner medulla. So the one here, what you observe here, the outermost layer, this is the renal cortex, and inner to the renal cortex we have the renal medulla. Okay, the renal medulla. So when we take a section of kidney, we find two parts, the outer cortex as well as the renal inner medulla. Now let's look at the parts that we can observe in the sections that we have seen, that is outer cortex and inner medulla. So the first part that we are going to observe is medullary pyramid. So here, if you have a look here, this structure that is found in the medulla region, which is appearing like a pyramid, is what we refer as the medullary pyramids. And you can see that the medullary pyramids are actually connected to the renal calyces, and then the renal calyces will open into the pelvis. So the part of the kidney which is in close contact with the renal calyces is actually the renal pyramid. I repeat, the part of the kidney which is in close contact with the renal calyces is the renal pyramid or medullary pyramid. So if we try to describe it, medulla is divided into a few conical masses known as medullary pyramids. Medulla is divided into a few conical masses known as medullary pyramids. The medullary pyramids project into the calyces. So if we have a look at a previous diagram, you can have a look here. These are your renal pyramids, right? And you can see that the renal pyramids, they are projecting into the renal calyces, or the medullary pyramid open into the renal calyces. So here we can find there are number of renal or medullary pyramids. So that brings us to the next part of the kidney, and that is the columns of Bertini. Now, we know that the cortex is the outermost region, but some portion of the cortex enters into the medulla region. Some portion of the cortex enters into the medulla region, and those portion of the cortex which enters into the medulla region is what we call it as the column of Bertini. The column of Bertini. So you can see the structure here, right? This is the column of Bertini. So if we try to describe it, the cortex extends in between the medullary pyramid as renal columns called columns of Bertini. So we know that when we take a section of kidney, we find there is an outermost cortex and inner medulla. But in some parts of the cortex enters into the medulla region, and this part of the cortex which is entering into in the medulla region will be in between the medullary pyramid. And this cortex, which is actually now lying in the medulla region, they are in the form of columns, and we call them as columns of Bertini. So with that, we have tried to understand the structure of kidney. So if we have a look at the structure of kidney, the first part that we had discussed was the hilum, which is actually the concave end through which the blood vessel, the ureter, makes their entry. Then we observed a funnel-shaped structure called as the renal pelvis, and which is inner to the hilum. Then we observed the renal calyces, that is, the renal pelvis has its branches in the medulla region, and each of those individual branch we call it as renal calyx, plural we call it as renal calyces. And when we take a section of kidney, we find that there are two parts, an outer cortex as well as inner medulla. And the medullary pyramid can be seen as many conical masses, and these conical masses are actually in contact with the calyces, or we can say the medullary pyramid open into the calyces. Then the last structure that we discussed was the columns of Bertini, that is the part of the cortex which makes its way into the medulla region and appears like column is what we refer it as columns of Bertini. So I hope you have understood the structure of kidney. So that brings us to the very important structure of the excretory system of the kidney, and that is the nephron. So we know that nephron is the functional unit. Nephron is the functional unit of kidney, and it is this nephron which is actually going to help us to filter the blood and get us our end product, that is the urine. So let's have a look at the nephron. So as we know that we have got a pair of kidney, so we have around 1 million complex tubular structure called nephron. So 1 million means approximately 10 lakhs of nephron in a single kidney. So in our body, we have a pair of kidneys, so we have around 20 lakhs neurons present, and they are the functional unit. Why do we refer it as functional unit? Because they help in the urine formation, that is, they filter the blood and produce the end product, that is urine. Now, what are the parts that makes up the nephron? A nephron basically has two parts. One is the glomerulus, another is the renal tubule. So in this diagram, you can see that you have a blood vessel which we refer as the afferent arteriole. Okay, which we refer as the afferent arteriole. So what do you mean by afferent in biology? So whenever there is a blood vessel which is entering in an organ, we refer it as afferent. And if there is a blood vessel or a nerve which is leaving the organ, then we call it as efferent. So here the blood vessel which is actually bringing the blood into the nephron is actually the afferent arteriole. So this afferent arteriole actually becomes a tuft of capillaries. Okay, becomes a tuft of capillaries which we call it as glomerulus. So your nephron consists of a blood vessel, that is a glomerulus, and the second part of the nephron is the renal tubule. So what you see here in this yellow colored tube shaped structure, coil structure, is the renal tubule. So the glomerulus along with the tubule forms the nephron. Okay, I repeat, the glomerulus along with the tubule forms the nephron. So here you can see you have the glomerulus, okay, and here you have the renal tubule which constitute a single nephron. So let's try to describe the glomerulus. So as we have seen in the diagram, it is a tuft of capillaries formed by the afferent arteriole. So which is a blood vessel which is bringing blood to the nephron? It is the afferent arteriole. So the afferent arteriole is a fine branch of renal artery, right? So the artery which is coming from the heart and which is gaining entry into the kidney is the renal artery, right? So the renal artery makes fine branches, and these branches becomes the afferent arteriole. So blood from the glomerulus is carried away by an efferent arteriole. So the artery which is bringing blood to the kidney is your afferent arteriole, and the blood vessel which is taking the blood away is the efferent arteriole. Now let's have a look at the second part of your nephron, that is the renal tubule. So the renal tubule begins with a double wall cup-like structure called Bowman's capsule, and the Bowman's capsule encloses the glomerulus. So if we have a look here, so the structure that you see here immediately around the glomerulus is the Bowman's capsule. So if we have a look at the renal tubule consists of the Bowman's capsule, which is the initial part of the nephron. The Bowman's capsule then continues further to form the next part, that is called as proximal convoluted tubule. So that we call it as proximal convoluted tubule. This proximal tubule then starts to descend to form a loop called as the loop of Henle. Then this loop of Henle then ascends and then joins to form the next tubule, that is called as distal convoluted tubule. And then this distal convoluted tubule will open into a common collecting duct. So what are the parts which we need to understand under the renal tubule? We have the Bowman's capsule, we have the PCT, we have the Henle's loop, and we also have the DCT. And mind you, collecting duct is not a part of nephron because many of the nephrons open into a common collecting duct. So if we try to list out the parts of a nephron, we come across the blood vessel or the afferent arteriole, which become